Joining me now live from Washington is Giorgio Cafiero. He's the CEO at Gulf Estate Analytics. Giorgio, great to have you here with us on TRT World. So Netanyahu finally said it, that he wants to occupy Gaza.
Yeah, it seems that this is the plan. It seems that Netanyahu's government is going to proceed accordingly. It's very interesting, though. Netanyahu is saying that Israel's plan is not to govern the enclave, but to create a quote-unquote security perimeter and then have Arab forces come in and manage the governance of Gaza. It's unclear which Arab forces that will be. I'm inclined to think he might be thinking about forces from Egypt, UAE, perhaps some other countries, but I think that raises some really interesting questions because I think it's quite unlikely that Netanyahu will be able to convince these Arab countries to deploy a force to Gaza powerful enough to take on the responsibilities of governance in Gaza. So it's very unclear to me what the end game is after Israel conquers every square inch of Gaza, assuming that Israel is able to do so.
Right, and of course, we don't know whether or not any Arab nations would want to become a part of this plan, because certainly it's going to be very concerning for them. Anyone to be called a stakeholder in this Netanyahu plan would be really bad for them.
Well, absolutely. I think that all of the Arab states in the region understand that if they were to send their forces into Gaza, many of the Palestinians in the besieged enclave would view those Arab forces as taking part in an Israeli occupation in one form or another. And that could be extremely risky because there would be Palestinian resistance groups. And we're not necessarily just talking about Hamas, but also other factions in Gaza that could take up arms against those Arab forces. And so I think the leadership in Arab governments throughout the Middle East and North Africa would really want to avoid subjecting their military forces to those kinds of dangers.
Now, Giorgio, of course, occupying Gaza is something that Netanyahu has always wanted. Even before October 7, of course, Gaza was under this air blockade and sea blockade from the Israeli side. But of course, touting the idea of a full occupation is something that we are hearing now from the Israeli Prime Minister. So I wonder whether or not you think it's possible that he's only saying this out loud only because certain Arab nations have actually agreed to his plans.
Well, I think the main factor here has to do with political pressures that have been building up inside Israel, specifically the challenges that Netanyahu faces when it comes to his efforts to keep political stability within his own coalition. He has to placate the most far-right and extreme elements in his cabinet, figures such as Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and I think that's the main reason why Netanyahu is so serious about moving ahead with this plan right now. And of course, at the same time, today marks 22 months since Israel's genocidal war on Gaza began. And it's clear that Israel has not achieved its wartime goals over the past 22 months. And I think probably from the perspective of Netanyahu and those around him, this annexation of Gaza is necessary to defeat Hamas. That's how they look at the situation. It's very clear that this would probably be a death sentence for the Israelis, the remaining living Israelis held captive in Gaza. But we all know that, unfortunately, the lives of those Israelis have never been saving those Israelis has never been the priority for Netanyahu. And I think his plan to move ahead with this conquest of Gaza really brings that point home.
And Giorgio, do you think the White House is completely on board with this plan?
I don't think the Trump administration would put any pressure on Israel to not proceed with this annexation of Gaza. We need to, not only just consider the statements that have come out, the White House, in which the Trump administration is basically saying this is Israel's business. Israel needs to make the decision on its own. as if the U.S. would not be complicit in the annexation. But let's also keep in mind, too, that when Trump was in the Oval Office during his first term, it was his administration that chose to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Also, Mike Huckabee, former Arkansas governor, who is now the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who's also, of course, very, very close to Trump. He has long been an advocate of an Israeli annexation of the West Bank. So when we consider Trump's past actions, we consider the worldviews, the philosophies of people like Huckabee and others who are around Trump, I have to conclude that this administration would not push back against any Israeli conquest of Gaza.
Giorgio Cafiero, thanks very much for joining me here on TRT World. I really appreciate your taking out the time.
Thank you.